The air at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri was heavy, with the humidity of a late June evening. But inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was brittle with a different kind of pressure. It was June 21, 2025, and the pilots of the 509th Bomb Wing were staring at a map that few had ever expected to see in an operational context. The target packages were not the caves of Afghanistan or the command centers of Tripoli, but the hardened, subterranean arteries of the Iranian nuclear program. Fordow and Natanz. The mission, codenamed Midnight Hammer, was a logistical leviathan, requiring a synchronization of assets that spanned the globe, but its tip was a Ghost 7B-2 Spirit bombers, the only aircraft on Earth carrying the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, MOP, deep into the most heavily defended airspace in the Middle East. As the crews stepped out onto the tarmac, the bat-wing silhouettes of the bombers absorbed the floodlights, looking less like machines and more like voids in the fabric of the night. The ascent was a deafening roar that quickly tapered into a silent, climbing turn toward the Atlantic. Inside the cockpit of the lead bomber, Spirit of Pennsylvania, Major David Hatcher watched the altimeter climb past 30,000 feet. The mission profile was grueling. A 37-hour round trip, requiring multiple mid-air refuelings and a physiological endurance that pushed the human body to its absolute limit. They were flying into a sunrise they wouldn't see from the ground, chasing the darkness across the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, and finally, into the perilous skies of the Persian Gulf. For the first 12 hours, the mission was a test of patience. The pilots took turns napping in the narrow space behind the ejection seats, eating bland, low-residue meals to minimize bodily functions, and monitoring the encrypted data links that connected them to the global strike package. They were not alone. Hundreds of miles away, tanker tracks were being established, and F-22 Raptors were ghosting into position, ready to sanitize the airspace of any threats that might dare to rise. Crossing into the CENTCOM area of responsibility changed the texture of the silence. The chatter on the comms, already minimal, dropped to zero. The B-2s went fence-in, shutting down non-essential emissions and retracting their communication antennas to become virtually invisible to radar. They were now holes in the sky, sliding through the electromagnetic spectrum undetected. Below them, the world was a tapestry of sleeping cities and watchful radar sites. The Iranian Integrated Air Defense System, IADS, was one of the most dense and sophisticated in the world, a layered cake of Russian-made S-300 and S-400 batteries, indigenous Bavar 3 systems, and a web of early warning radars designed specifically to hunt stealth aircraft. But the B-2 was built for this exact nightmare. Its continuous curvature, radar-absorbent materials scattered the probing waves of the enemy sensors, returning nothing but background noise. To the Iranian radar operators scanning their scopes in the bunkers below, the sky was empty, a calm blight that betrayed nothing of the 7 apocalypses gliding overhead at high subsonic speed. As they approached the Zagros Mountains, the terrain grew rugged and unforgiving. The Fordow fuel enrichment plant was their primary target, a facility buried so deep inside a mountain that it was immune to standard airstrikes. It was a fortress of rock and concrete, designed to survive anything short of a nuclear impact. But the B-2s were carrying the MOP's 30,000-pound monsters, designed to drill through 60 meters of earth and reinforced concrete before detonating. Hatcher checked his weapons display. The bay doors were armed. The navigation system, updated by satellite link, had the coordinates locked to within a few feet. The tension in the cockpit was a physical weight. They were deep in enemy territory now, well beyond the point of no return. If they were detected, the sky would light up with surface-to-air missiles. Every second of silence was a victory. 2 minutes to release. The mission commander's voice was a flat, calm monotone. The formation split, each bomber vectoring toward its assigned aim point. The deception tactics were in full swing elsewhere. Cyber attacks and decoy drones were flooding the Iranian networks with phantom contacts, drawing their attention to the south, away from the silent killers approaching from the north. The Spirit of Pennsylvania lined up on the mountain ridge shielding Fordow. Hatcher watched the countdown. The doors snapped open, disrupting the stealth profile for a heartbeat, and the massive weapon fell away. The aircraft lurched upward, relieved the 30,000-pound burden. The bomb didn't just fall, it flew, guided by GPS fins, adjusting its trajectory to hit the ventilation shaft with mathematical precision. The impact was not a surface explosion but a geological event. The MOP slammed into the mountain at supersonic speed, its hardened steel casing punching through the rock like a needle through fabric. It penetrated the first layer of concrete, then the second, burying itself deep into the subterranean complex before the fuse triggered. The mountain shuddered. From the air, the pilot saw the shockwave ripple through the earth, a sudden venting of dust and debris from the tunnel entrances as the overpressure liquidated the facility from the inside. Secondary explosions followed, a chain reaction of centrifuges and volatile gases igniting in the crushed depths. Seconds later, the Spirit of Georgia and Spirit of Missouri dropped their payloads on Natanz, cracking the reinforced roofs of the buried halls and collapsing the centrifuge cascades into twisted metal. The egress was the most dangerous phase. The element of surprise was gone. The Iranian air defense network woke up screaming. Radar warning receivers in the B-2s lit up as search radars went into overdrive, sweeping the sky frantically for the source of the devastation. But the B-2s were already turning, banking hard to the west, presenting their most stealthy aspect to the threat rings. Below them, flashes of anti-aircraft fire stitched the night, firing blindly at the sound of the engines. An S-300 battery launched a salvo of missiles, telephone pole-sized rockets riding pillars of fire into the dark, but they had no lock. They climbed aimlessly, their seekers could the electronic warfare jamming pouring from the supporting EA-18G growlers standing off at the border. The bombers slipped through the chaos like phantoms, weaving between the engagement zones, their shapes baffling the tracking algorithms of the enemy systems. The flight back to the tanker track was a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. They had been in the air for 18 hours, and they had another 18 to go. Refueling over the Mediterranean was a delicate ballad, the massive bombers dancing with the KC-46 tankers in the pre-dawn light. The pilots, running on stimulants and sheer willpower, hooked up to the booms, taking on tens of thousands of pounds of fuel while their minds replayed the strike. The sirened, but it was different now. It was the silence of survival. They had flown into the most heavily defended fortress on Earth, delivered a decisive blow, and walked out without a scratch. As the sun rose over the Atlantic, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a crushing fatigue. The pilots rotated sleep shifts, one monitoring the autopilot while the other collapsed in the cot. The data links began to stream the battle damage assessment. Satellite imagery confirmed the total destruction of the Fordow intake tunnels and the collapse of the main enrichment hall at Natanz. The mission was a complete success. Operation Midnight Hammer set the Iranian nuclear program back by a decade in a single night. But for the crews, the geopolitical implications were distant noise compared to the physical reality of the flight. Their bodies ached, their eyes burned, and the hum of the engines was a constant, drilling presence in their skulls. Landing at Whiteman was a surreal return to normalcy. The runway lights were a welcome embrace after the hostility of the Persian night. One by one, the 7 Spirits touched down, their tires chirping against the Missouri concrete. The drag chutes blossomed, slowing the black giants as they taxied back to their hangars. The ground crews were waiting, silent and respectful, knowing that they were witnessing history. The pilots climbed out, stiff and stumbling, blinking in the floodlights. They had left as aviators and returned as the executors of a new kind of warfare, one where the enemy never sees the sword until it has already cut. The mission was over, but the message had been delivered with 30,000-pound clarity. There was no sanctuary, no mountain deep enough, no bunker strong enough to hide from the Spirit. The debriefing was exhaustive. Every second of radar tape, every electronic emission, every flight parameter was analyzed. The intelligence officers were particularly interested in the lack of response from the Iranian fighters. It seemed the stealth and the cyber warfare integration had rendered the Iranian Air Force Base blind and deaf. The B-2s had not just bombed a target. They had dismantled the illusion of invulnerability that the regime had built its strategy upon. The Midnight Hammer was not just a strike, it was a paradigm shift. In the days that followed, the world would wake up to the news. The headlines would scream about the destruction of the nuclear sites, the geopolitical fallout, the threats and counter-threats. But for the pilots of the 509th, The memory would always be the silence. The silence of the long cruise, the silence of the stealth run, and the silent, unseen destruction of a mountain from the quiet sanctuary of the cockpit. They had held the power of a nation in their fingertips, dropped it into the heart of a mountain, and slipped away before the dust could settle. The B-2 Spirit remained the apex predator of the skies, a technological marvel that turned the complex chaos of war into a cold, calculated equation of stealth and physics. As the crews went home to their families, the bombers were already being prepped for the next alert, their black skins absorbing the secrets of the night, waiting for the next call to deliver the hammer from the dark.